What are you doing in here? Julian Caldwell's sharp, cold voice cut through the soft lullaby. Elena flinched, her arms instinctively tightening around the warm bundle on her chest. Inside, baby Lily had finally drifted off after hours of crying. Her steady breathing was the only peaceful sound in the cold, high-tech nursery. He stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette in a perfect suit, his hand holding not a toy, but a phone glowing with charts and data. His gaze wasn't on his daughter's sleeping face, but fixed on the fabric Elena used to hold her. "What is that thing?" he asked, his tone pure scrutiny. "It's a faja, sir," Elena answered softly. "It helps her feel secure." That security was something his array of expensive sensors and apps had failed to provide. But to Julian, this simple cloth sling was an error, an unprogrammed variable. It was chaos in the perfect order he had imposed on his daughter's life. "My protocol doesn't include this," he said flatly, striding toward her, each step radiating authority. "I hired you to follow the schedule, not to bring your outdated traditions into my home." He pointed to the smart crib in the corner of the room. "Put her in there. The schedule requires her to sleep alone to foster independence." Elena looked down at Lily's angelic face, her tiny chest rising and falling against Elena's own heartbeat, then back up at the man before her. He could read thousands of lines of data on a screen, but was completely blind to the simple message his own daughter was desperately trying to convey. Julian Caldwell, a technological genius, couldn't understand the most fundamental language in the world, the language of comfort. Gently, Elena placed Lily in the smart crib. The moment the baby's back touched the mattress, a piercing cry erupted again, drowning out the soulless classical music the machine automatically played. Elena's heart ached. Mrs. Davis, the Caldwell's longtime housekeeper, entered, her face etched with concern. "Miss Garcia, the master insists on adhering strictly to the schedule. The schedule is hurting her," Elena replied, a note of desperation in her voice. "Listen to her, that's not a normal cry. She needs to be held." Mrs. Davis's eyes flickered to the neatly folded faja on the changing table. "I understand, dear, but this is the Caldwell estate, where the rules are set in stone." Elena clutched the fabric, the only inheritance she'd brought from her laughter-filled home in New Mexico. "At home, this was all it ever took to soothe my younger siblings," she whispered, her voice filled with longing. "My grandmother taught my mother, and my mother taught me. It's all I've ever known." She had put her dreams of painting at art school on hold to come here. This salary was the only hope for her mother's chemotherapy, the only way her brother Miguel could stay in school. She couldn't lose this job. "Learn what the master wants," Mrs. Davis advised, her tone softening. "Don't fight him." The housekeeper left, leaving Elena alone with Lily's heart-wrenching cries and her own turmoil. She looked at the poor child thrashing in the cold crib, then at the faja in her hands. On one side was the job she desperately needed. On the other, what she knew in her heart was right. And tonight, it seemed she couldn't have both. Following Mrs. Davis's advice, Elena tried to push her instincts aside. She told herself to trust Julian's system. The next morning, she picked up the tablet, determined to follow every last detail. The tablet became her true boss. But a machine can't comfort a child. Every feeding became a tear-soaked battle. Every scheduled cognitive stimulation activity was met with desperate wails. Day after day, the luxurious mansion echoed with only one sound: Lily's constant, painful cry. The baby didn't improve. She seemed to be wasting away. Elena's patience wore thin. During an end-of-day report, She couldn't hold back any longer. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice urgent. "She isn't eating and barely sleeps. This schedule is exhausting her." Julian, his eyes glued to the charts on his phone, replied mechanically. "The data indicates her caloric intake is within acceptable parameters. Continue as planned." "But those are just numbers," Elena blurted out. "Can't you see she's fading?" This time, Julian looked up. His eyes were like ice. "I hired you to execute, not to feel. If you can't do the job, I will find someone who can." The threat stunned her, but it didn't scare her. Instead, it ignited a spark of defiance. She couldn't let a helpless child continue to suffer because of a stubborn father who trusted only machines. She had to do something, even if it cost her everything. The next afternoon, as soon as Julian's car disappeared down the long driveway, Elena whispered to the fussing baby in the crib. "Time to stop listening to the machines, Lily," she said softly. "It's time to listen to our hearts." She ignored the flashing tablet. Instead, she took the faja from the closet. As she expertly wrapped Lily against her chest, she felt the baby's tiny body begin to relax. The whimpers that had been about to start faded away. Elena opened the glass doors and stepped onto the vast terrace. The honey-colored sunset stretched across the Napa Valley vineyards. "You see, little one?" Elena pointed into the distance. "This is the real world, not a set of black and white flashcards." She played a soft flamenco guitar melody from her phone. A warm breeze carried the scent of earth and grape leaves. "My grandmother used to say there's no music sweeter than the wind singing through the vines," she murmured, swaying gently as she hummed a Spanish lullaby. And then, a miracle. Lily, the baby who had never smiled, curved her lips. A real, radiant, and pure smile bloomed on her face. "Oh, my God, you smiled," Elena whispered, her heart overflowing with joy. "You smiled, my little angel." Just then, Mrs. Davis stepped out, carrying a tray of tea. She froze, staring at the scene before her. "Miss Garcia, the baby," she stammered, disbelieving her eyes. "Yes," Elena turned, beaming. "She's smiling." Mrs. Davis set the tray down and walked closer, her eyes wide with wonder and emotion. She looked at the child resting peacefully against Elena's chest, then at the young Nanny. She gave a single, slight nod, an unspoken word of approval. That night, for the first time, Lily slept soundly, peacefully, against Elena's chest. For the first time, a true, quiet peace fell over the Caldwell estate, a silence no technology could ever create. Julian Caldwell couldn't believe what his phone was showing him. Lily's biometrics, which had been flashing red warnings for weeks, had suddenly turned green. She was eating more, sleeping deeper. But when he pulled up the security feed, he didn't see his daughter in her crib, following the protocol. He saw Elena on the terrace, holding the baby in that colorful cloth. And then he saw the smile. That smile wasn't in any of his algorithms. To Julian, it wasn't a miracle. It was a system failure, an inexplicable result. He came home that evening and went straight to the nursery. Elena was softly humming, rocking a sleeping Lily on her shoulder. Today's reports were different, he said, his cold voice shattering the calm. Elena turned, her face hopeful. "Yes, sir. Lily is doing so much better." "I saw the security footage," he cut in, his eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" I just comforted her," Elena tried to explain. "She needed warmth, connection." "Connection is not a measurable data point," Julian dismissed. "I don't pay you for sentiment. I want a detailed report." He gestured to the empty desk. "Log everything you did that wasn't in the app." Every action, every song, every minute. I want to know your exact formula. Have it on my desk by morning. He turned and left, leaving Elena speechless. He hadn't asked how she had soothed his daughter. He wanted her to write an instruction manual for love. Elena wrote no report. She couldn't analyze a smile or quantify a hug. Instead, she continued to do what her heart told her was right. A few days later, a meeting in San Francisco was canceled at the last minute, so Julian decided to come home early. As his sports car turned onto the gravel road winding through his family's vineyards, he saw them in the distance. Under the golden California sunset, Elena was strolling between the rows of vines. His daughter, Lily, wasn't in her high-tech stroller, but nestled safely against Elena's chest in that garish cloth. Lily wasn't crying. She was looking up at the young green grapes, her tiny hands reaching out as if to touch them. The scene was peaceful, natural, and it infuriated him. He slammed on the brakes, the sound of crunching gravel shattering the silence. He stormed out of the car, his expensive suit looking utterly out of place in the rustic setting. "Is this your report, Miss Garcia?" he roared, his voice thick with anger. Elena spun around, startled, clutching Lily protectively. "Sir, I was just—" "You were just ignoring every rule I set," he interrupted, closing the distance between them, his eyes blazing. "I demanded a report." "Not a cultural field trip." "These are my vineyards, not a stage for your ancient experiments." "It isn't an experiment," Elena replied, her voice trembling but firm. "It's how my mother and my grandmother raised their children. She likes the fresh air." "I don't care what she likes," Julian hissed, his anger making him lose control. "I care about protocol, about science, about the image of this family. What are you turning my daughter into? A prop for your backward customs?" He pointed at the faja as if it were something filthy. "Get that thing off of her!" Without waiting for a reply, he reached out and roughly unwound the knots of the sling. His grip was clumsy and stiff, the complete opposite of Elena's gentle touch. The moment she was torn from that familiar warmth and security, a piercing scream erupted. Lily didn't just cry. She shrieked, thrashing in her father's arms as if being tortured, her terrified eyes searching desperately for Elena. She didn't want him. She wanted the arms that had comforted her. "Get her out of here," Julian ordered his driver, who stood frozen nearby, his voice devoid of remorse. His gaze was fixed on the hysterical child in his arms. Elena caught one last tear-filled glimpse of Lily. She said nothing. No words could have expressed her pain. After Elena was gone, the Caldwell estate returned to what it had always been, a luxurious tomb. Julian tried everything. He put Lily in the crib, activating the app's emergency soothing mode. The Mozart, the white noise, the projected images on the ceiling, they were all useless, swallowed by Lily's ceaseless screaming. The following days were even worse. Lily regressed completely, becoming even more distraught than before. She refused to eat, lost weight rapidly, and slept only in short, exhausted bursts. That night, walking down the dark hall, Julian heard his daughter's choked sobs coming from the nursery. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt a terrifying emptiness. The mansion was the same, the technology worked perfectly, but something was gone. It was cold, soulless. He realized then that Elena hadn't just taken the cloth sling with her. She had taken the very soul of his home. On the third night, the silence between Lily's cries felt heavier than ever. Julian sat alone in the opulent living room, the phone with its useless charts tossed aside. He was exhausted. His technology, his pride, had failed. In his desperation, his mind raced, searching for a variable, some detail his logic had missed. And the only image that surfaced was of Lily, peaceful in Elena's wrap. He didn't search for Faha. He typed a simple, desperate phrase into the search bar: how to soothe a crying baby. He scrolled past hundreds of generic tips. Then he saw an article titled, "The Ancient Wisdom of Baby Wearing." He clicked. Images flooded the screen. Modern parents all over the world, New York, Tokyo, Berlin, carrying their babies in slings nearly identical to Elena's. They weren't conducting ancient cultural experiments. They were just holding their children. He read about skin-to-skin contact, about the security a baby feels hearing a parent's heartbeat. There were no complex charts, no advanced algorithms, just simple truths about human instinct. It wasn't rocket science. It was common sense. And he had dismissed that common sense as backward. A bitter, burning shame rose in his chest. The feeling propelled him into the one room he always avoided, his late wife's study. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. Maybe he was just looking for a piece of her warmth. He sat in her chair and opened a random drawer. Inside was her journal. He turned to one of the last entries. The familiar handwriting jumped out at him. "I saw a mother wearing her baby in a sling today. They looked so peaceful. I hope our daughter will know what it feels like to be held in her father's arms. I want her to know the rhythm of her parents' hearts before she has to learn about algorithms." The journal slipped from his grasp and fell to the floor. It wasn't an accusation. It was a prayer he had cruelly ignored. Sitting there, in a room full of memories, with the sound of his daughter's cries echoing in his ears, the proud fortress of Julian Caldwell finally crumbled. He buried his head in his hands, and for the first time since his wife's death, he wept. The next morning, Julian didn't call his lawyers or HR. He drove himself. The expensive sports car looked comical as it navigated the narrow streets of Elena's town, a world away from the luxury of Napa Valley. There were no grand estates here, only warm stucco walls and clotheslines dancing in the breeze. He asked a few locals for directions and finally found her. Not in a chic apartment, but in a small, humble cafe where the smell of roasted coffee and pastries hung in the air. Through the window, he saw her. This wasn't the timid Nanny from his mansion. Here, she was the center of a small universe. She was patiently explaining a math problem to her younger brother, then turning to feed a piece of pastry to her mother, who looked tired but beamed with pride. Elena was smiling, a natural, unforced smile. He realized this was the real Elena, a person born to love and nurture. Julian took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The tinkling of the bell above the door silenced the small cafe. All eyes turned to the stranger in the immaculate suit. Elena froze, the smile vanishing from her face, replaced by a guarded look. Her brother sat up straight, and her mother placed a protective hand on her daughter's arm. Julian didn't walk directly to their table. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining a respectful distance. "Miss Garcia." "Elena," he began, his voice hoarse, stripped of all its former authority. He looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time, Elena saw the vulnerability in the arrogant man. "I was wrong," he said, the two simple words heavy with regret. "I was an arrogant fool and a terrible father." He glanced at her mother and brother. "And I was deeply unfair to you." Elena said nothing, just watched him silently. "Lily, she needs you." His voice broke. "She doesn't need my apps. She needs you. I was too blind to see it." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a desperate plea. "Please, come back. Not as an employee following my stupid rules. Come back and teach me. Teach me how to be a father. Teach me what you've known all along. Please." The cafe held its breath. The plea of the wine magnate Julian Caldwell wasn't echoing in a boardroom, but in a humble cafe, in front of the woman he had treated so cruelly. His redemption had truly begun. Elena looked at Julian, then turned to her mother and brother. Her mother squeezed her hand, a gentle warning. She didn't trust this rich man. Taking a deep breath, Elena gathered her courage. When she faced Julian again, her gaze was no longer that of a timid nanny. It was calm, steady, and resolute. "I'll come back," she said, her voice clear. "For Lily." But not under the same terms. Julian nodded eagerly, ready to agree to anything. Anything. Not just anything, she corrected. 3 things. These are my conditions. She held up a finger. First, not me, but you. You will learn to use the faja. Lily needs to feel her father's heartbeat, not just her nanny's. I will teach you, and you will wear her yourself every day. Julian paused for a second at the demand that he personally embrace the very thing he had scorned. But then he gave a firm nod. Done. I'll learn. Second, she continued, her eyes shifting to her mother, who was watching him intently. When you fired me, you didn't just insult me. You insulted my family. My mother lost sleep with worry. She looked Julian straight in the eye. You will apologize to my mother. Right here, right now. For a man as proud as Julian, this was an even greater challenge. But he didn't hesitate. He turned to face the older woman with the stern eyes. He bowed his head, a gesture of sincere respect. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I am sorry. My arrogance caused your daughter pain, and for that I am truly sorry." Elena's mother said nothing, but the hard lines on her face softened slightly. "And last," Elena said, her voice firm, "most important, Lily is an American, but she will also grow up with my Hispanic heritage. You must promise to respect that. My lullabies, my language, my values, they will no longer be forbidden in your house. They will be a part of Lily's life." She stared at him, waiting. This wasn't a demand about a job. It was a demand for dignity, for recognition. Julian looked at her, at the young woman who had taught him a lesson no data chart ever could. "I promise," he said, his voice solid. "I promise." Julian's transformation was not just an empty promise. It began that very afternoon, clumsily and honestly. In the living room of the Caldwell estate, Elena stood before him, holding the faja. "Okay, put your arm through here," she instructed. "No, not like that. You have to wrap it tighter. She needs to feel secure, not loose." Julian, the man who could run a multi-million-dollar wine empire, fumbled with a simple piece of cloth. He frowned, struggling with the knots, feeling more inept than he ever had in his life. I can't get it right. I'm afraid I'll drop her." "You can do it," Elena said patiently. "Just breathe. Feel her. Stop thinking like an engineer and start feeling like a father." Finally, with her help, he did it. Lily was placed in the sling, her small chest against his. The baby stirred for a moment, then looked up at him with her big, round eyes. And then, instead of crying, she let out a long, contented sigh and snuggled against his chest, falling asleep. For the very first time, Julian felt the full, warm weight of his daughter. He heard her steady breathing, felt his own heart beating beneath her tiny body. No app, no chart could ever capture this feeling. It was a connection that was primal, powerful, and real. He stood perfectly still, afraid that the slightest movement might break the precious moment. One afternoon, as Elena was playing with Lily on the floor, her phone rang. It was the hospital where her mother was being treated. Her heart seized, fearing bad news. But the voice on the other end was cheerful. "Miss Garcia, we're calling with some wonderful news. The entire cost of your mother's advanced chemotherapy treatment has been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor." Elena was stunned. Anonymous? But who? "I'm sorry, we're not at liberty to say. They only ask that we ensure your mother receives the very best care," the nurse replied. A few days later, a thick envelope from a prestigious engineering university arrived for her brother Miguel. He called her, his voice trembling with excitement. Not only had he been accepted, but he had been awarded a full scholarship covering tuition and living expenses, sponsored by a private educational fund. That night, after Lily was asleep, Elena found Julian in the library. He was holding a book, but she could tell he wasn't reading. "The hospital called," she said quietly, "and Miguel's university sent a letter." Julian didn't look up, merely turning a page. "Is that so? Good news, I hope?" "It was you, wasn't it?" she asked directly, her voice choking up. He was silent for a long moment before closing the book and finally meeting her gaze. He didn't admit it, but his eyes said everything. Tears began to stream down Elena's cheeks. "I told you not to use your money to." "This isn't money," he interrupted, his voice low and sincere. "This is restitution, and it's an investment." She looked at him, confused. "You can't take care of Lily with your whole heart if that heart is heavy with worry for your family," he explained. "Your mother deserves to be healthy. Your brother deserves a future. And you deserve peace of mind." He stood and walked closer, closing the invisible distance between them for the first time. "I was wrong to disrespect your family, Elena. I understand now that they are the source of your strength." In that moment, Elena realized their bond had grown beyond the child they both loved. It was being built on a foundation of profound understanding, respect, and the quiet atonement of a man who was finally learning how to love. The Caldwell estate was no longer a sterile laboratory. It had become a home. The evening sun no longer glinted off cold technology, but streamed into rooms filled with the sound of Lily's laughter. In the evenings, you no longer heard programmed symphonies. Instead, you heard the gentle strumming of Elena's guitar and, sometimes, the clumsy sound of Julian's off-key Spanish as he tried to sing a lullaby with her. He had turned off all notifications, deleted all the tracking apps. The tablet that had once been his Bible now gathered dust in a drawer. Julian, with Lily sleeping peacefully in the faja against his chest, smiled softly as he listened to the music. He was no longer searching for perfection in numbers and charts. He had found it in the steady rhythm of his daughter's breath, in the warmth of the fabric that had taught him so much, and in a profound peace he had never known. He finally understood that the greatest legacy he could give his daughter wasn't found in a complex algorithm, but in the simple, ancient wisdom of an embrace.